Welcome back to Mills and Chill. This is Texting Under the Influence, Chapter 8. As usual, full credit to the author, Cara Lockwood, and Mills and Boon Publishing House. Let's get into it. The abandoned round pill case in her bathroom drawer stared up at her like a gaping accusation, Jenna thought. "Should have refilled me," it said smugly, as she glanced at the empty pill casings and felt a panic rise in her throat. How could she have been so careless? She knew how. She'd broken up with Jax right after she'd run through her last month's supply, and the thought of going to the drugstore and picking up new ones and paying for them just seemed like an insult and a waste of money. At the time, she believed she'd be staring at a long drought of sexless nights. Or at a minimum, occasional drunk sex with Jax, and she'd been militant about using condoms with him since the HPV scare. Normally, she was always careful, but now she was in trouble. "Morning, beautiful," Jack growled in his sexy brogue as he curled his muscled arms around her small waist. He nuzzled her neck, and she watched him in her bathroom mirror, feeling her stomach clench. He was gorgeous, no doubt about that. His dark hair melded with hers in the reflection, and she watched him with dark eyes. "We'd have beautiful children," she thought. Then almost instantly felt a white-hot panic. Children! What was she even thinking? She wasn't going to have his children, or anyone else's right at the moment. She had one night of crazy sex, and now she was suddenly considering settling down and having kids? No, absolutely not. That was not her. Just days ago, she didn't even want to admit to Maddie she wanted a boyfriend, much less a kid. And what about the HPV? Her doctor had said she cleared it, whatever that meant. But should she tell Jack? Should she... Well, she should, she figured. Her mind whirled. "You're absolutely glowing this morning," Jack murmured into her neck, and she felt another stinging bite of panic. What if she was already pregnant? No, couldn't be so soon, she thought. Still, the possibility loomed like a dark shadow across her morning. Jack... She needed to tell him. He had the right to know, didn't he? And maybe once he did, he'd feel the same blinding fear she did. She almost wanted it. To know they were both on the same page. This was too much, too fast. A problem they'd need to solve. We didn't use... He waited, blue eyes intent on hers in the mirror. God, this was harder than she thought. She felt stupidly embarrassed. "I should have told you. I had a case of HPV, she mumbled. "The doctor said I cleared it, my last appointment, but still." "No worries, love," Jack murmured, nuzzling her neck, taking it all in stride. "Don't something like half of adults have that?" "Yes, but I should have told you, and She swallowed hard. There was more. She had to get the rest out. He probably assumed she was on the pill, and now she had to tell him. Like an idiot, she wasn't. "Just spit it out, Jenna. I'm not on the pill." She threw the words at him in rapid fire, waiting to see if they hit their target. Jack, however, didn't even blink. He registered not a single iota of surprise as he pulled her tighter. "What happens, happens," he said, kissing her neck, as if impregnating a woman he'd only just started dating was something routine in his world. "I wouldn't have done what I did unless I was prepared for all consequences. I want to be with you, Jenna." He gazed at her steadily, and then turned her to face him. She stood frozen, stunned, as he tipped his head and sealed his offer with a kiss. As his lips met hers, she forgot momentarily that this impending crisis that had turned her world upside down, and he pulled away. He gently caressed her chin with his finger, and as she stared into his blue eyes, she realized this was the answer most women would want to hear, and yet something just didn't sit right in her. She couldn't help but wonder, had he done this on purpose? She remembered the mad desire in his eyes the night before. Had he wanted this to happen? She'd heard of women trying to trap men with unintended pregnancies, but could men do the same thing? She felt hot and cold at once. Mistrust rippled through her as Jack turned on the shower. Jenna pulled her jacket close to her as the cold fall breeze whipped through her hair. She'd insisted on meeting Jack at work later, determined to make a pit stop at the corner drugstore before heading to her cubicle. She knew she was just being silly. Jack couldn't have done this on purpose. After all, he planned to leave the country soon. Knocking up an American couldn't be at the top of his packing list. The more she thought about it, the more she convinced herself Jack simply hid his own fear about an unintended pregnancy, or probably figured the chances of it happening seemed so remote he didn't really have to worry about it. Under all that chivalry, she guessed Jack to be no more than a typical guy. She walked determinedly to the drugstore, swinging through the revolving doors. Her high-heeled boots made clicking sound on the tile floor as she walked to the pharmacy window. She knew what she had to do. Maddie had done the same in college once. The pharmacist didn't blink at her request as he slid a small box over the counter. Plan B, the box read. Considering the foolishness of Plan A, she needed a Plan B. Thank God for emergency contraception, she thought. She picked up the box and tried not to think about what it would mean if she didn't take the pills, if she let nature take its course. She'd squashed the thought of carrying Jack's baby, of growing round and fat on ice cream and anything else she wanted to eat with Jack doting on her every need. She couldn't really be serious with being okay with a baby. They'd slept together twice. No way he'd be up for that kind of commitment. She knew she wasn't. She'd paid for the contraceptive and tucked the box into her purse, walking quickly out of the store. Soon enough, she wouldn't be worrying about it anymore. Jack found himself humming a bright tune in the elevator up to his office. He felt happier than he'd been in months. He thought the first night of sex with Jenna had been amazing, but it just got better and better. His thoughts wandered back to the night before, to the amazing sex they'd had. He couldn't wait for more. Maybe he didn't have to go home to Dublin. Maybe he stayed. And if Jenna did get pregnant, well, maybe he'd marry her and they'd have a whole gaggle of Kearney kids. And be one big, happy family. There you go again, lad, skipping steps 3 and 4. Jack felt in no mood to listen to the warning bells in his head, or to an imaginary Maeve. Truth be told, Jack had thought about stopping last night, had considered the possibility that Jenna might not be on the pill, but he'd felt so intent in the moment, he hadn't wanted to stop. He thought to hell with the consequences. Running Jack's off in the night had just set off some caveman-like instincts in him that he couldn't properly control. He wanted to make her his. It was as simple as that. One of his sisters would have said that he was marking his territory in a tone reserved for talking about dogs, but he didn't care. He was a man, and he wouldn't apologize for it. Jenna was a woman in every way a woman should be. He thought of her soft skin and trim thighs, felt a rumble of desire run through him. He wondered how he would make it through a workday without taking her again, this time over his desk. The elevator dinged, announcing its arrival on his floor, and he strode out, nodding to a few co-workers as he passed, as the hum turned into a jaunty whistle on his way to the office coffee machine. In his head, he'd already started to work out whether he should turn down his sister's job offer, whether it was too late to take his resignation back. His boss, the VP of Marketing, would take him back in a heartbeat. Or what if he asked Jenna to go with him to Dublin? She'd already said her family had moved away from Chicago. Maybe she'd be up for an adventure abroad, he thought. Well, he thought about the kids growing up in Ireland, and all their aunts and cousins. He thought that held some appeal. Going too fast again. That little voice in his head just wouldn't go away. Tell her any of that, lad, and she'll bolt. As he tried to take his mind off domestic dreams, he drove through the many waiting emails in his inbox. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the elevator door open, and she stepped out, looking as alluring as ever, wearing her tall black boots, leggings, and short jacket. Her dark eyes found his across the room, and he smiled, unable to help himself, feeling like a goofy kid. She nodded at him and hurried to her desk. Throwing down her bag and shrugging off her coat, she grabbed her purse and headed straight to the kitchen. He watched her go, fearing she'd get zero work done with her in the office. How could he help but stare? Suddenly, he jumped to his feet. He'd catch her in the kitchen, maybe alone. The thought sent a thrill through him as he stepped out of his office. He flew to the break room, a small white-walled room with a door. 2 small tables, the coffee machine, sink, and fridge. He found her alone, standing by the water cooler. Small paper cup in hand, a quick glance over his shoulder told him no one was near, and he snuck up behind her, resting his hand delicately on her waist. She jumped a mile, nearly dropping her paper cup. She whirled. "Jack! God, you scared me." Hastily, she snuck something into her pocket. He didn't press the case. "You free for dinner?" "Again?" Jenna looked honestly surprised. "We've got a month," he teased. "Might as well make the most of every day." Jenna grinned. "You bet." The next 4 weeks passed by in a blur of happy dates, amazing sex-filled nights, and heaps of condoms that Jenna made sure they used every time. They went everywhere in Chicago, the zoo, the top of the Willis Tower, where they stood on the glassed-in observatory ledge. They went to museums and ate in the best restaurants. Jenna had lived in Chicago most of her life, but had never done many of the touristy things, and they did them all. She'd never had so much fun in her life, and she dreaded the end of the month. She came to feel closer to Jack than she had to anyone else, and she couldn't figure out why. "Probably because you've spent every waking hour with him," she told herself. It was true. They'd barely spent a night apart since they started sleeping together, but they'd fit together so easily, so effortlessly. It was more than convenience. Jack was so patient and caring, so thoughtful. She'd never met a man like him. He kept her laughing with stories of his childhood in Dublin, and she felt more than comfortable sharing memories from her past, including her adventures at an all-girls Catholic school. They shared the same humor, the same wry outlook on life. Jenna knew this wasn't like any other relationship she'd ever had before. She'd never believed that love could happen so fast, that a real connection with someone could be made in such a short time. And yet, here she was, falling for Jack Kearney in a way that she'd never done before. She tried not to think about what life would be like when he left. Empty, she thought, but didn't want to think about it. She didn't want to think about how things would change. She kept hoping that if she ignored it long enough, she wouldn't have to face it. The last weekend before he was scheduled to move out of his place, Jack spent in Jenna's bed, mulling over the very real possibility that he was going to stay in Chicago. He'd planned to tell her the good news, as she rushed around the bedroom in her underwear, desperately looking for matching socks. They were both late for work, but Jack no longer cared. "Wear 2 mismatched ones under your boots. Who will notice?" "I will," Jenna protested. She tossed a purse at him in anger, and he dodged the bag with a pillow. It hit the covers of a bed and toppled over, a lipstick and a couple of receipts toppling out. He went about stuffing the loose bits back in her bag when he happened to read a receipt from a local drugstore. Plan B. He glanced at the date. A month ago? Right after their accident? He felt the blood rush in his ears. Why hadn't she told him? "What's that?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Holding the receipt, "You got Plan B?" Jenna furrows, glancing over at him. "Oh, well, we don't have to worry, about..." Her voice trailed off as she shrugged sheepishly. She looked calm and nonchalant about the prospect, yet Jack felt like she'd kicked him in the shins. There was the fact he was Catholic, so there could be all kinds of reasons he wouldn't like Plan B, but even he knew religion had nothing to do with his reaction. He could be upset that she'd unilaterally made a decision, but as the brother of 4 sisters, he'd be the last man to try and tell a woman what to do with her body. No, he knew why his heart ached, why he felt someone had popped his party balloon. She didn't want what he wanted, to be together, to possibly even have a family. Sure, he knew he rushed everything, and he was 2 steps ahead of her, but the evident relief on her face told him everything he wanted to know about where her heart and her head were. He could see that not only were they not on the same page, they weren't even in the same book. "Oh," the syllable came out as a kind of grunt as confusion dripped across her face. "What's wrong?" she asked him, but he could hardly tell her the truth. She'd think he was crazy. Share his dreams about being a couple, a family? He'd sound like a lovesick idiot. Well, maybe he was.